weapon will prosper. No enemy triumph. He will not overcome. He can't scale these walls. Injustice will not win. Hell's gates will not prevail. Not on my time. Not on my watch. I am a watchman, and I take my place. As I wait, I will keep the faith. 'Cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. I will run the race, I will fight the fight, and I will keep the faith. I keep my eyes fixed on you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Pastor Tim Carscadden here from Christian Center Shreveport, joined with my son Zachary from North Carolina. He'll be on here in just a few minutes as we do our noon prayer on the 19th day of February 2024. So glad you've joined us. Uh, I want to thank Zachary and John West for filling in for me last Monday. I was at a travel day from Oregon back home. We had an amazing ministry time up there in Oregon. To all our folks who watch in Oregon, thank you. I met so many of you at the conference who walked up to me and said, "Man, we listen to your podcast. We watch the live streams, your noon prayer. So thank you so much." That happens everywhere I go, everywhere in the nations, everywhere in the country. You never know how far these platforms reach. And I'm excited that we are able to help others. More people just thanking us for helping them navigate through the season that we're in, this dark season. That's all we're trying to do. Especially on my daily podcast, I try to give prophetic updates where we are, where we're headed, and how to walk through that. It's not enough just to point out the darkness is of the season, but we need answers. We need life and a way to move forward in that place. So that's what we're trying to do in our podcast and then on these live streams. Obviously, 2024 is here and this is election year. Today, we're going to focus on Israel because I think it's critical and it is connected to the election because of the Biden administration's demand that they have made to Prime Minister Netanyahu that the war end before the election. He made that public statement. Demanding that they stop this and they keep telling Israel how they can fight this war. And Israel has been stalwart and just really relentless in going after what they need to is to cut the head of the serpent off. And we'll discuss a little bit about that today and give you some prayer initiatives on how to pray. I'm thinking about it was a year ago, a little over a year, almost a year ago in May, if you remember, we did 21 days of prayer for Israel. And these were the things we were praying about. We felt war was imminent, things could happen and escalate, and that it has. I think it could have been worse had not that prayer movement been a part of the prayer initiative to prepare Israel and the land for what was coming. And in what has happened is the atrocity of October 7 can never be downplayed of what happened there. And always remind yourself when you hear these world leaders, I think it was Brazil today, likened the Gaza war to the Holocaust. You have things like that occurring where you're hearing this rhetoric from the nations. And remember, let's not forget what happened on October 7th, the massacre, rape, pillaging of the land. And that's why we are where we are today. If that would happen to any of those countries, I guarantee you they would be doing the same thing. But that's neither here nor there. That's just kind of what we're talking about there. So, as we pray today and as we give you directives, we think this is a very important moment in time of where we are. And we want to make sure that you have the tools and you have the wherewithal, the knowledge on what's going on in the land the best we know how. We have friends in the land, and we're hearing what's happening there, as well as watching, vetted news outlets of what's occurring there. Now, before we shift to Israel, remind you of the war in Ukraine, which is something major happened. If you watched any of the news, Russia took one of the major cities, one of the major strongholds this weekend, and I received a note from my friend, a pastor friend in Ukraine, and this is what he wrote me. He said, after prolonged and bloody fighting in the city Avdiivka, I'm not sure how you say that, the Ukrainian command finally today gave the order to retreat. While I'm writing this, he said, lately the whole country has been living with news about it. People were killed there, a lot of wounded, and in fact, only God knows how many people were killed. These are new wounds for the Ukrainians, and there is no way to avoid it. God gives comfort and peace and calmness through his word and prayers, but still, it's impossible to ignore what is happening today on the front line. In order to preserve the inner peace and calm, today all Ukrainians are experiencing the pain of what is happening. And then he said, this is our new reality, but the church must remain healthy. And in order to continue to serve the people who today, both literally and figuratively, are on the verge of death. And then he gives me some maps and shows me some of the soldiers, some of the videos of what's happening there. Now, in line with that, Chuck Pierce gave a word when the war started. He said it'll be at least 2 years, and so at the end of this month, it will be 2 years. Now, this is where some reports are coming out that Putin is willing to talk about a ceasefire. Obviously, with the victory of the territories he's taken, America responded with no. There will be no ceasefire. It'll have to come from Ukraine's side. A ceasefire. Look, a ceasefire is a ceasefire. Numbers that we're getting reports from within the land is upwards, sometimes up to 1,000 people a day are dying every day. That's a lot. You think about 9/11, we lost 3,000 people. Okay, they're losing 1,000 a day sometimes, and on both sides, the Russian and the Ukrainian sides. Unfortunately, the Russians are probably losing many, many more because they're sending their bodies into war, basically knowing they're going to die. They're taking people out of prison, mental institutions, whatever, and putting them on the front lines. That's happening sometimes in Ukraine as well. I've had friends tell me that they've seen a man driving down the street with his family. They'll stop them, pull the man out of the car, and say, "You're going to the front," and leave the family in the car to pick up the pieces of what happened to dad and where's he going. Many of my friends that do humanitarian work are stopped occasionally or and asked, "Why aren't you at the war?" And because they're doing humanitarian work, they're able to continue that. And so it's a very difficult situation. Well, that affects us because this is part of the. We'll get into that a little bit later of the legislation battle that's going on between the Senate and the House on the Ukrainian bill, which is tied to the Israel bill, and that's what we in our border bills. So that's why I bring that topic in there. But let's please pray for the Ukrainians. Let's pray, for a ceasefire. I don't see any other way. Neither side has a plan of what's going to happen after the war, and I believe that it's inevitable unless something major happens that Russia will take that territory and build that land bridge to Crimea, which is unfortunate, but it's a reality. And if Ukraine doesn't play their cards right, as we put it, they could lose even other areas because you got Belarus, you got Hungary, you got other areas, Poland, who once owned part of Ukraine, and we could talk about borders being moved all along the way. So there's no telling what's going to happen there. So we want to pray especially for the peace. Like you got to understand, when you've given so much and given so many lives, we don't know. As of November, I was told 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers had died. Again, I gave the context in the whole Vietnam War, 10 plus years, we only lost 50,000 plus. So in 2 years, they've lost more than we did in the entire 10-year war. And who knows, it may even be more. We don't know. The numbers are not always told. Anyway, so we want to pray. We don't want the destruction. If there's no plan for breakthrough, then we need to see a ceasing of that and ask God to really intervene in that situation. That's our prayer. Okay, sorry about that little detour, but I don't think it's a detour. I think it's tied all together what we're going on, as well as the battle that we have with the principalities that are in the realm of the spirit. Okay, so let's get into the war in Israel, the Gaza war, and this will help you in context to pray for what's going on there. Let me give you a little map here. I don't think it's a great map, depending on what you're looking at on your phone or computer. But let me get into this real quickly. This is the basic area of Gaza, and you'll see this uh, where it starts at Gaza City, Gaza Khan Yunis, it's called, and then Rafah, the bottom part here. So the war has already taken place, obviously, in the north and the central, and now we're heading toward Rafah. That's the very bottom. That's down at the crossing on the Egyptian border. If we slide down here, you'll see some of these where the lines are right there. That's the Israeli ground operations. They've already taken the north. This is where they are in the south. Evacuation zones is where the pink area is there, or the sort of pink area. And then the last one down here is Rafah, the Rafah closing. They're just beginning to work down there now. Having said that, the U.S. State Department and the president said, do not go into Rafah. Yeah, there's too many civilians there, etc. Well, they went in and recovered two hostages. So they have not listened to America, thank goodness, on that one. And they move forward. Now, as I move in, one more map. These are some of the areas that have been damaged as of February the 2nd. This is up north, Gaza City. This is where all the bombing you see, where Israel has bombed, especially up in the north in Gaza City. Then we have some in the middle. Then you have the Khan Yunis, which has been a big area because that's where most of Hamas was. And now you're starting to see Rafah down here, where you're starting to see that crossing in the bombing. This will be the last part of the war. Rafah, that's where the last brigades are. They're also looking for the commander of Hamas, who they believe is down in that area. So that's kind of a picture of what's going on the map as we pray into this, and you can understand how dangerous it is. Fortunately for Israel, they've lost some troops. I'm not sure, 100 and some odd. I lost count how many have passed away because of the war, but minimal compared to what could have happened when you go in and do guerrilla warfare, door to door, and so forth. So that's what's happening there on that front when we look at that the battle there. Now, on top of that, this is where I want Zach to come in with me. We're going to talk a little bit about America's push to what we call unilaterally declare a Palestinian state at the end of the war. Now, this is a political move by the Biden administration. Obviously, it's election year. There's a lot of tension in the left side of the Democratic Party. He has to do something to appease them, and this could be just rhetoric saying this, but they are saying this. Blinken has said it, that they will possibly unilaterally declare a statehood, Palestinian statehood. And that's dangerous for us because we know what the word says: woe unto any nation that divides the land, Joel chapter 3. So we know that that's a danger point for us as a nation, and it would invoke major judgment on America, immediately major judgment on America, should we do that. So this is why we push in, guys, at 318. This is why we're pushing in. So, Zach, why don't you speak to that, of what Blinken's up to, what the administration is trying to persuade or trying to push. I think some of them it's just fishing, but they're putting it out in the international, market as far as media, and just kind of thing. I think they're looking to see what they'll find. Anybody's going to join with them, et cetera. But they are saying this, and it's unprecedented for a nation to say we're going to create a nation within a nation without talking to the nation, which is Israel and the Palestinian people. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah, let me know how far you want me to go into this. Been reading a lot of reports, listening to a lot of reports today and over this week. And last week, I mentioned this briefly about how the U.S. and the U.K. are joining together to, as immediately as soon as this war ends, which now we're seeing the Biden administration push for this war to end sooner rather than later, because it's advantageous to the Biden administration's agenda it is to declare a two-state solution even before the war is even over. And you have some major issues which we could get into here about what that really means for not only the U.S. but for Israel. And one of the things that, if you look at the demographics here in America of why the Biden administration is doing this, is we obviously understand they've caved to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, you have a subset of American voters who are legal U.S. citizens who adhere to the two-state solution. They want a two-state solution. They want a Palestinian state. And there's not that many of them, but the majorities of where they make up are in very purple areas,
Right.
but blue districts. And so they could swing states. They could swing Michigan. They could swing Arizona. They could
That's right.
swing Pennsylvania.
That's right.
So this is why the Biden administration is kind of going in on this. They obviously, in the logical sense, would say, well, this is obviously not something we want to do, but we want to stay in power, so we're going to do anything we can to stay in power. And what that means for us is doing what those who will have to vote with moving forward, because they're in those positions to swing New York, swing Michigan, as I said. So that's kind of the starting point, the tipping point of why this is important for the Biden administration to make these moves.
So here is the statement today. The Knesset met today. The council met concerning this option that they're talking about, where they would create a Palestinian state. So let me play the video here of this statement, and they did translate in English for us, so it helps us here a little bit.
Sunday approved a so-called declaratory decision that opposes the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. The measure was brought to a vote by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Israel categorically rejects international edicts on a permanent arrangement with the Palestinians. Such an arrangement will be achieved only through direct negotiations between the sides. Recognition such as that, following the massacre of October 7, will grant a major prize to terror.
He was referring to last year's terrorist incursion in which Hamas militants killed around 1,200 people and took about 240 people hostage. The Israeli cabinet's vote came a day after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Israeli President Isaac Herzog on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. While a strong supporter of the Jewish state, the United States has also been a longtime proponent of a two-state solution to permanently end the conflict in the Middle East.
We're thinking of the suffering of people caught up in the middle of conflict, including the Palestinian men, women, and children in Gaza. We're thinking as well of the genuine opportunities that lie before us for a better, more secure future for Israelis, Palestinians, and all of our friends in the region.
On the ground, Palestinians were seen Sunday inspecting the damage caused by an Israeli strike in Rafah, where the population is gearing up for an Israeli ground offensive. Already more than 28,000 Palestinians have been killed in the war, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. United Nations health officials said Nasser Hospital, the second largest in Gaza, is now, quote, completely out of service. And residents of the Jabalia refugee camp in the northern Gaza Strip held protests on Saturday complaining about food and medical shortages.
Epidemics and diseases are spreading among our people in North Gaza, where there are no medicines. If they are available, a citizen cannot afford to buy them.
Condemnation of the Israeli offensive was loud over the weekend at an African Union summit in Addis Ababa. Algeria is expected to present a plan to the United Nations Security Council this coming week, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The United States has already expressed opposition to the draft resolution, arguing it favors an alternative it has been working on with its partners that would include at least a 6-week pause to the hostilities and the release of more hostages. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News.
Okay, so interesting. There's a lot to take in that little newscast. The first thing is, thank goodness that the Israelis have voted accordingly. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was most felt was a dead duck, and after this war would be removed. There is a movement in the country now, and his favor is gaining to a point that now not say most likely, but it looks better for him to maintain his position at the end of the war. Victory will change the hearts of people. So, and they're going to be victorious. I believe that with all my heart. The Blinken, it sounds so smooth, and you speak to this, Zach. It sounds so smooth that what he's saying, oh, we just care about the people and the peace of the Palestinian people, the Israelis, the Arabs. Look, a divided land will be anything but peace. This has already been proven. It does not work. We gave them Gaza Strip. Look at what's happening there. As one report said that day, Gaza Strip should be like Dubai. With all the monies that they have, they should be living a lifestyle of luxury in that land. They are not, because they hate the Jews and they hate Israel. And they do not want to just have the Gaza Strip. They want all the land. That's not going to change. So if we have a Palestinian state, who's going to run it? Abbas, he's an absolute, utter failure. Hamas, they're a failure. And now we're getting new narratives that they're a peaceful group. We're getting all these type of things coming out there. So this is something about Blinken, who, smooth talking about what America's motive, and then others take advantage of this situation to help all these people. Look, it's not going to work, and we got to pray. We got to stand with Israel, who has said here, and I say covenant Israel for the land of what God has said, and say we reject this. So speak to that, Zach.
Yeah, let's take a step back. First, let's talk about the deal. Looked into this a little bit, and what we find is that this deal has basically already been agreed upon between the U.S., the UN, Germany, France, the UK, and Qatar via Hamas, where Abbas would come in and basically be the prime minister and be a proxy more so for Hamas and the Fatah, who are the government organization of Hamas. And the term they've come to is not necessarily allowing anybody to be within power, but somebody called a technocrat, i.e., somebody who is a professional, politician, businessman, whatever the case may be, who can come in. They still know how to build bombs, set them off, fund rockets and all that stuff. They're just not the ones doing it. They're just going to be the ones in power, allowing all this stuff to happen. And so that's the deal that is in place. And then this supposed deal of a 6-week ceasefire to end the war and allow um, eh, Hamas to release the hostages, which there's been no verification of life. So
Right.
that's an issue. There's an issue there. But then also it goes back to the 1948 border lines where Jerusalem is split, Israel split down the middle, and you have settlers in the West Bank and in Golan Heights and other areas who are now going to have to immediately evacuate because we say so. And then there's an issue with the fact that they're leaving Israel out of these negotiations is the biggest issue, and that was the cabinet vote. Um, Israel itself said we do not agree to this. One, because we don't agree to a two-state solution right now, and two, because you're not even allowing us to be involved in this. There is an agreement called the Oslo Agreement that Carolyn Glick, a journalist out of Jerusalem, talks about how that via the Oslo Agreement, the U.S., the Palestinians, Arabs, and Israel have agreed to, if there is a peace solution, if there is an agreement to a solution to the land, that it has to involve Palestine, the U.S., and Israel. And well, right now, the Biden administration, unfortunately, is breaking that. Now let's get into Blinken. I actually have another video clip I want to play
Sure.
that goes into kind of the smoothness of words of what Blinken said this week when discussing about the Palestinian people. And I want to we need to listen and hear what he says so we can understand this, because this is the prime narrative, the main narrative that is being pushed out there right now.
Israelis were dehumanized in the most horrific way on October 7th. The hostages have been dehumanized every day since. But that cannot be a license to dehumanize others. The overwhelming majority of people in Gaza had nothing to do with the attacks of October 7th.
That's debatable.
That's right.
The families in Gaza whose survival depends on deliveries of aid from Israel are just like our families. Their mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, want to earn a decent living, send their kids to school, have a normal life. That's who they are. That's what they want. And we must not lose sight of that. We must not lose sight of our common humanity.
Okay. And so that's the portion I want to play. That is very troubling to hear him say, because this is being said a lot, and this has been said since October 7th. They just want to live the normal life. They just want prosperity. Polls coming out of Gaza since the October 7th massacre took place, 80 to 85% of them show that the Palestinians would continue to vote for Hamas moving forward.
Yes.
The polls from within Gaza. Not only that, there are same organizations. Again, a journalist by the name of Karen Glick is pointing this out several times in articles and podcasts and things. She shows that 90 in the polls, they're showing that 94% of Palestinians since October 7th have never been prouder to be a Palestinian because of October 7th.
That's right.
So there is an entrenchment there. And then lastly, this is becoming bigger, more and more known, is the involvement with UNRWA and Hamas and the connection there. Since October 7th, Israel has put out publications that show that they have been able to verify currently that upwards of 10% of UNRWA employees are within active terrorists within Hamas. And we, the United States, fund UNRWA. And the goal of UNRWA is to be a humanitarian, and they have schools and things of that nature. And when Blinken talks about, this is how this all connects. When Blinken talks about they just want to send their kids to school, at these UNRWA schools, they're teaching them. There's been video evidence that has been publicized. Israel has publicized it. This is very well known. Not only are there rockets, but there were training videos that were on some of the journalists that they captured who were part of Hamas since October 7th that showed that they were training them to kids 6, 7, 8 years old and upwards to be terrorists. And so when you have a culture
Yeah.
with this type of aggression towards not only wiping off Israel off the face of the map, but then their next step is to come towards America. We have to really analyze this and say, do we want to be bedfellows with these type of people? Now, as I said earlier, the reason the Biden administration is doing this is because we're in an election year. They're kind of shaking in their boots a little bit because they have to do something. They can't do nothing, and they feel like that the position to take in order for them to stay in power is to, because of the anti-Semitic push, to go towards those who are in a sense anti-Semites, and that doesn't just mean only Arabs. There are some Jews here in America who would fall within that category as well. So, a huge prayer point here for those of us who are praying for this administration and for the nation as well.
And we look at this an analogy here. What if we said that about the Nazis that are guarding concentration camps? Because that's what you have. You have hostages in there, and just saying they're really just family people. They have children, they have families. They just want to live their life, and we're just trying to help them out while they're guarding, hostages. And that's what happened when these hostages came out. The first batch of them that came out, the citizens were throwing rocks at the cars. They were screaming. They were angry that these hostages are being released. Those are your citizens and normal people. 85% of them who support Hamas. Now, UNRWA is a United Nations organization, and now they're finding, I think, upwards of at least 25% or more are Hamas soldiers that are in UNRWA. So I found this video. This is kind of a sad video. This is from October 7. And when they came into one of the cities, kibbutz, there's a dead body here. Fortunately, they're blurring it out for us. And this truck comes up. Now, they've identified this man in the blue here. They got his name and everything. He's an UNRWA worker. And so here he comes. He's got his AK-47, checking everything out. and there's a dead body there on the ground. Well, they want the bodies because even Israelis want their bodies back. It's a big part of their religious faith and so forth. And so here comes this guy, an UNRWA worker, and then some other terrorist that was working with. Look at the casual walk these guys have at a dead body. And this is just beyond me. This person's been slaughtered there. They grab them, you can see here, and just throw them in the back of this truck. And just what bothered me about this video is this, like I said, the casualness of these terrorists. And UNRWA, I'm going to call UNRWA a terrorist group because this guy, especially because they're part of the problem. They're finding their stuff with weapons everywhere. Watch this guy here. Look how just casually is, just going through their belongings. Let me see what I can get here. And these people work for the United Nations, and that's a scary thought because of the fact that we as Americans are funding this. We're funding this. Look at just kicking this stuff. Yeah, there's just a dead body there, nothing to it, and that's quite alarming to me as they drive off during the October 7 battle. Okay, so that to me is very disturbing, and we can't allow that. And now United Nations wants to vote for a ceasefire. Okay, what about removing your workers out of there? Why not bringing them to an international court and have them prosecuted? Okay, that's my thoughts for what they're doing, because they've identified these people, and that's a scary thought, that what we're seeing right here of what's going on with UNRWA. And UNRWA's been a bad organization forever anyway, but now we're seeing that. So we want to pray that justice be done there on that issue.
And to give some hope in all this situation is there are congressmen and senators who are working and to try to get a bill passed. Senator Ted Cruz is the one leading the charge to make UNRWA a designated terrorist organization so that the U.S. will not fund them. So there is some hope. Whether that gets passed or not, this Senate and this Congress is yet to be determined, but at least there's acknowledgement from some of our representatives, senators, who understand the situation. And this is where we really have to make the push to be aware of the elections that are coming up,
Yeah.
and who could possibly be in. And say this is that, look, let's look at John Fetterman. Is yes, there are a lot of things that we would 100% disagree with him on, but he is more of a Clinton Democrat than anything, and
Yeah.
he will obviously he's Jewish, and he will stand for Israel, and he is probably it's hilarious, but he is someone who has, to put some levity to the situation, who has the biggest backbone of it all.
Yeah.
And it seems like since he had a stroke, he gained some sanity, and he's the one kind of mocking these protesters of waving a flag in front of them ever since October 7th massacre, when there should be others who do something, maybe not to that degree, but similar, of standing up for Israel, who aren't, who are Jewish themselves. So to bring some levity to the situation, is there are those, both Democrat and Republican, who are aware of these situations. Maybe we can talk about the bills and things that are going forward, but there is a a line for hope. So there's not any just despair, give up,
Amen.
hopelessness. There is
Amen.
hope for some of our representatives. They are aware. It's going to take time for things to go through.
Yeah, and
the
Senator
process.
Fetterman, I talked to lobbyists I work with in D.C. They go to his office and work with him, and all over his walls in his office are the pictures of the hostages. And he has how long they've been there, and then he has pictures of the ones who were rescued. He was out there for the day of prayer for Israel, the rally for Israel. They said he stood out and outside with the Israeli flag wrapped around him for 8 hours, just standing in solidarity with Israel. So that's been his big thing. So yeah, you're right, Zach. We have to say thank God for that. You never know where help is coming from. I thought about Isaiah 62. You remember we prayed that last May, the Isaiah 62 prayer fast that we were on. On your walls, it says, "O Jerusalem, I have appointed watchmen all day and night. They will never keep silent. You who remind the Lord," remind him of what? Of all his promises, right? Concerning covenant Israel. "Take no rest for yourselves, and give him no rest until he makes Jerusalem the praise in the earth," which, that's our heart's cry. That's why we're bringing an update today concerning Israel. and we want you to stay on the wall and pray with us for them. And that's where the hope. I'm so glad Zach said that, because we need to make sure that we don't lose hope in the midst of this battle. As much as I don't want to see death, and let me tell you this: when they say 28,000 have died, you don't trust that one iota, not one iota. Don't trust anything they just said. That's from the Hamas. They wanted to tell them. They remember the day they said 500 were killed and found out there wasn't. It was 50, and they were the ones that killed them. It wasn't even the Israelis. So you can't trust their numbers at all. There's no way of knowing. Israel's not in there counting bodies. That's not they may count their own, but they're not counting bodies. They count terrorists that they take out, but they don't take any other. I mean, you never want to have civilian death. It's inevitable in war, but you never want to have it. And I remember I heard one of the spokesmen for the U.S. government, which I thought was really interesting. They said the precautions that Israel is taking to protect civilians in Rafah, in Gaza, he said America wouldn't even take those type of precautions as they did in ISIS wars and others. So I think that was just an open statement there of where we are. They're doing everything they know to do. And of course, the Biden administration keeps threatening them. And fortunately, the backbone of the Israelis is that we're not going to listen to you. We got to win this war. And a 6-month ceasefire will be a disaster, because what's going to happen is you're going to see Hamas reorganize. And also, to me, the most dangerous thing can happen in a ceasefire is the top leaders can escape. Whether they go to Egypt or they go somewhere else, they'll find a way to escape out of the situation. And this is where you give no quarter to the enemy in this moment. It's like you have the enemy on the run, and now you want to say, no, we're going to stop and let them reorganize and re-equip while we take a rest. And yes, the Lord spoke to me about some of the hostages. And it's coming out to be true. I didn't want to tell anybody this, but the Lord said to me, many of them are already dead. And I knew that, and I didn't like that. I didn't like that word from the Lord, but I sadden. I pray for the families, but I pray that those that are still alive, if there are some, we know there are some, they captured 2 of them or recovered 2 of them recently, but the rest of them, that they would be recovered. We found in the hospital recently that they found medications for the hostages in the hospital that had never been given to them, has their name on it and everything. So they're not even taking care of the hostages.
Yeah, and a point of hope is here in America, there are military advisors and people involved in our military who are understanding the situation. And for whatever reason, obviously the Biden administration is not listening to them. But there is a professor is at West Point by the name of John Spencer, who is, in all reports that I've been reading, is becoming a glorified hero for those within Israel, because he is pointing out some facts for the Israelis and for the Biden administration to start to become aware of. And I want to bring this point up is so that not only this administration, but future generations and administrations will understand the severity of what Israel is having to do. And his specialty is urban warfare. So when he says something, it means something. And he's analyzed what Israel is having to do right now in Gaza and what they're doing, talking about giving warnings, being precautious about the terrorists who are wearing civilian clothes, protecting civilians, protecting even in some cases their own hostages. And obviously we've seen that incident play out in an unfortunate event earlier, but they've learned from that since. And he talked about in a lot of his statements and a lot of his reports when he does analysis is that Israel is doing a magnificent job beyond any other army that has ever gone anything. And he says the United States and any other nation has never experienced anything like this ever before to the degree that it is. You got to think, for the closest thing I think was in Vietnam that they talked about having in Manila in World War I, when there were the tunnels and even in some of the islands in the Pacific where the Japanese had burrowed themselves underneath. But what is going on in Gaza, the 400 miles plus eight plus layers where you could drive a truck and other things through, that Hamas has built with all the money they've been given for billions of dollars for years from all the nations around the world.
Yep. Yep.
No one has ever experienced anything like this
That's right.
before.
That's
And
right.
these are the people who the Biden administration is trying to get in a relationship with and appease in this moment.
And let's watch that appeasement word that's coming out right now, that Hamas is a peaceful organization. I saw that from the Ireland Prime Minister It's coming from the UK, all over the UK. Other countries are starting to say that they're really not a terrorist organization. These are going to be partners of peace in the future, and you can't change. A pit bull is always a pit bull. You can't say, "Well, we trained it," and what happens is that pit bull act good for a while, but eventually that pit bull is going to turn on its owner or children or something like that. And I think that's what we have to, as it said, a snake is always a snake, even if it's been calm and you've been taking care of it. It is still a snake, and that's why they have to cut the head of this thing off. We learned that in the Arab Spring when Egyptians took off the head of Muslim Brotherhood because they knew that was the problem. And when they took the head off, peace came to Egypt. And Egypt, if you've watched the border walls Egypt put up, oh my gosh, triple barbed wire, on and on it goes. They do not want those people in their land because of the problems that they create. Because they know that they at the root of what they believe and what their ideology is. So they don't want them just not they're Arabs, yes, they don't mind that part, but they don't want the ideology that comes with the people who are tied to Hamas. That's their big issue, and they want to keep them out.
And the big thing to remember of why we're so certain about this is because anytime Israel, the United States,
Mhm.
and Palestinian group and Arabs have come to some form of agreement, Israel, in pretty much every situation, has been willing to give up everything
Yeah.
and give in to the demands of the Arabs or Palestinians, who's ever doing the negotiating. And you can point fact to it, 1918, 1940, 47, in the 60s, 70s. Every time there's been a negotiation, what happens is the negotiation fails because there is a two-state solution that is offered. And then what is reciprocated is a terrorist attack on Israel.
Yeah.
So that's where the certainty in these situations can come, and that's not only known, but that's agreed upon throughout the world, and understanding this is the historical fact of what happens. And so this is what Israel is saying. All right, enough's enough. And you're also seeing a big shift of where the populace of the people, everyday people, upwards of 80 to 85% of them have shifted to the right. So they, on October 6th, they woke up as left-leaning progressive, even in America, Democrats. And then the saying goes is on October 7th and October 8th, they woke up as Jews.
Yep.
And so they're having to shift their worldview right now because it's being utterly shaken.
And so we want to pray also for our government, especially Speaker Mike Johnson. As you know, the Senate passed a bill, Ukraine, Israel, supposedly border battle, one package, which Speaker Mike Johnson said to be dead on arrival. So they're not even going to vote on it. Thank goodness. Now, there's been a proposal. Bipartisan lawmakers have another bill, $66 billion bill, which was put out, I think, Friday. It was unveiled, which is going to give Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan a bid to break the logjam. And this also includes some border protection, which is the Stay in Mexico measure, and I think the Prop 42 issue in the land. These are all Trump policies that they've thrown in there, and supposedly that's going to go to the Senate, back to the Senate, and we'll see what happens. Please do not listen to the rhetoric that Speaker Mike Johnson doesn't want to help Israel, doesn't want to help Ukraine. We'd already sent one standalone bill to the Senate, the House had, for Israel aid. What they don't like, what Speaker Johnson's doing, and is that he believes you should pay for this. As a matter of fact, in this bill, the $66 billion, the money given is a loan. It's not just giving free money, which is different. Because the Biden administration just is printing money. We know we're in an economic crisis right now with the debt ceiling way out of control, which people don't understand that. Well, we'll just keep printing money. Well, that's fine. But what happens in America, we're paying interest on that money. But if we lose our credit rating, which is very likely soon, then the interest rates go up, and so then we can crash our whole economy. So this can be a big thing. And so Speaker Johnson wants to pay for this bill, and the way he wanted to pay for it was to cut into the 87,000 IRS agents that President Biden wanted to hire, and take some of that money, a minuscule part of that money, and use it for Israel. And it did make it. It made it through the House and went to the Senate, and it never even got off Schumer's desk. So when they throw the rhetoric back at Speaker Johnson for not voting, remember they've done the same thing. And then Schumer makes this big threat: if we don't pass this bill, we may have to send our children to war against Putin. Things like that. Just scare tactics, trafficking in fear, trying to get Americans to agree with that. So that's the biggest battle. Anything else, Zach? Before we
We could go on. Do you want to touch the sanctions from the Biden administration?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we kind of briefly touched this last Monday, but the Biden administration, and it's becoming more well known now, has put an executive order out and putting sanctions on Israeli farmers and settlers for defending themselves, even though there are bad actors, NGOs at play, who are saying these farmers are attacking these NGOs, even though they're being probed with their life. And what's happening is the Biden administration is going directly after Israelis. So no due process, no defending themselves. They're
Mhm.
just losing access to their bank accounts around the world if they have it, and trade. Which, if they're Israelis and they're exporting, their livelihood's gone. And not only on top of that, in the executive order, it ties to anybody who helps them financially. So if the administration were to find out that somebody were to help them, then they themselves would be sanctioned. And there is a former ambassador to Israel in the Trump administration, David Friedman, who puts out, and he's done an analysis on it, talking about how upwards of this goes after more than 80% of the Israeli population. And he talks about this. I want to read this quote, if you guys can see it here, where he's saying that this move by the Biden administration, an executive order on February 1st, is a disgrace. By its terms, it could apply to any Israeli who opposes a two-state solution. And right now, that's more than 80% of the population. As I said before, people are shifting against this. So anyone who the State Department feels is hostile to creating a Palestinian terror state could wake up one morning and find his funds frozen in his local bank account. Not meaning like United States citizens, but Israelis. Not only is this unlawful interference in another nation's internal politics and a key ally to boot, but it illegally punishes Israelis for exercising their free speech. Not Americans, Israelis. Biden is refusing to enforce sanctions on Iran, but has given himself the power to sanction Israelis who love and support America just because they refuse to commit suicide. And that's very, very true. And so we have to realize what this Biden administration is doing and understand that, yes, we're seeing a lot of bad fruit come out of this, but there are people um, within the Biden administration who need a voice right now. Their voice is being silenced,
Yeah.
and even lobbyists or people who they work with who need to have a voice, not only now but in the days ahead and moving forward. Because what happens is a lot of people who work in government stay in government, and so they work from one administration to the next. Is okay. We see these people who are the head now is in the next administration or in another Democrat administration or in another Democratic senator's office or state level, whatever the case may be. These people who are pushing these policies now need to be marked in the spirit and in the natural to say, okay, look, you're standing as believers and intercessors. You're standing against what the Lord would want in relation to covenant with Israel. But then in the natural of, okay, hey, look, this is what they mean. They're willing to sacrifice literally Israelis, and not only on top of that, but go against the fundamental principles here in America of free speech and due process. And so this is a very troubling thing, because the issue is this: is if they're willing to do it, Israelis across the world, if they were given the power to be able to do it in America, would
Yeah.
they?
Yeah.
And so that's what we have to look at, is if they're willing to go that far, they're showing the example of what they're possibly willing to do here.
Yep.
So we have to be mindful of that, be very careful. And we'll see if this video stays up here, but we'll always be on Rumble. So be mindful of that if this disappears one day.
Okay. Thank you, Zach, for your time and helping me today. We'll do our communion now as we'll pray over Israel. We hope we've given you enough insight and understanding of what's going on the ground best we can ascertain. Again, there's a lot of stuff we wouldn't know because of just intelligence hiding it and doesn't want anybody to know that. But we are saddened with some of the stances of our government. Is posturing again. It's all the election year. There's many reasons why this is going on. It sounds so right at times. Do not be moved by that. Make sure that you have discernment of the Spirit. I'm praying for a covenant Israel, the promise that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of the land, the promises that he has never forgotten that. He's always remembered that, regardless of the sin of Israel. And there are many even in the church that feel like Israel does not deserve to have the land because of the sin of the Jewish people. We must remember that we could say that about our own family. What if somebody would say your family doesn't deserve to be saved because of the sin of your family line? Well, and the sins that your family are doing that. Well, that's not God's justice, his grace. He wants to provide a way to fulfill his word. So when we pray for this, remember, the Aaronic blessing, which was when God he instructed his priests on how to bless Israel. He said, to them, he says, this is how you should bless the children of Israel. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. He gives them the Aaronic blessing. So God has always given a word to bless his people. That we would see his glory manifested in Jerusalem, that would be the heart's cry. His glory would be seen upon you, according to Isaiah 60:2-5. May the Lord will arise over you, and I will not hold my peace. And for Jerusalem's sake, as I read in Isaiah 62 earlier, that God's face would shine upon Israel. That's got to be our cry, that the Lord promised to restore the remnant of Israel, of God, from the land of Isaiah described, from the land. Isaiah described areas of the north, Assyria, south, Cush, to east, Elam, and to the west, the islands. That's all found in Isaiah 11. I've had a dream of that, of Isaiah 11:11 being fulfilled and people returning to the land. I know that's going to happen, that the Lord would give songs from the ends of the earth. We have heard songs, glory to the righteous. It talks about how God will cry out in Isaiah 24. I'm just giving you some directives here. Another one is Isaiah 30, and he will release his grace on the people of the land of Israel, and he will impart wisdom and his beauty, Isaiah 33. Isaiah 35, that the glory of God will be openly manifest in the midst of a weak people. They are weak right now in the natural, not in the military, but in the natural. That God's redemption, Isaiah 54, will be witnessed by all the nations. When God redeems Israel, it'll be a witness to all the nations. And that Israel's salvation would impact all nations. Isaiah 45, Isaiah 52, Isaiah 43, and Zephaniah 3, that God would reveal his love to his people. These are just some of the things why we're standing with Israel. We could go on and on. I have so many directives that I want you to agree with me on. But today I want to take this bread and this cup, and let's want to remember what Jesus did for Israel and what he's doing. He is the I am. I shared that in my sermon yesterday about how he's not I was or I will be, but he is I am as well. And he is the I am of Israel right now. We must understand they're in a valley of decision here of what to do. They're fighting an enemy, but the Lord wants to be on their side. They must choose the Lord, the Messiah. That's our cry. And that's one thing we're praying. We're praying for covenant Israel, that the God would use these circumstances to turn their hearts to look upon the one whom they pierced and say, there he is. We receive him as the Messiah. And we pray for the fullness of the Gentiles to come in so that God would turn his hearts to Israel. And now we got a problem because the Gentile church is speaking against him. So we need the fullness of the Gentiles. We need an awakening, a revival among the Gentile people, church especially, that they would come to the revelation of this truth. So I want to take this bread and this cup and remember it today. Lord, I thank you for the sacrifice of your body. And Lord, you died in Jerusalem. You said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you as a mother hen gathers her chicks. You long to see the promises of Abraham fulfilled, and that God, that worship would happen for all those who live in the land. And that was your cry. And so we take this bread on behalf of your sacrifice for that covenant promise. And we as a group of people stand in agreement in the name of Yeshua. And I take this cup now and I remember that you shed your blood there on Mount Calvary, on Mount Moriah. And then, Lord, that blood went into the soil of Israel and in Jerusalem. And you care greatly for the people there. You shed your blood for them. And Lord, we cry out that that blood would speak out a greater voice for the redemption of the land and the redemption of the people for your purposes. And may all the nations of the earth be marveled at your redemption of what seems to be a lost people, a lost nation, and see it come back for your glory. So one day we will all go and worship there every year in Jerusalem. We remember that in the name of Yeshua. Well, amen and amen. Thank you for joining us today on our live stream. Please share this with your friends if you feel like they would be interested in the prayer for Israel. It is election year, so we will probably be ramping up our live streams, especially this year, as the primaries start flowing and we start getting more clarity of what it's going to look like come November. We've got to press in. This is a critical time. We gave warnings in our congregational setting yesterday. The Lord's given us some warnings of darkness that's coming into the earth, but God is releasing his glory to deal with it. And I always remember this: when darkness comes, the sons of light must respond in like manner. We can't just sit there and accept it. Well, it's just getting darker. It's getting darker. No. Rise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. And so wherever you go, the deep darkness needs the greater light, which is Christ